And good evening, folks, and welcome to the first ever Tuesday Night Bison Chat. Galen Clavio joining you here as we launch something brand new, a collaboration, the first of its kind between the Back Home Network and IU Sports Media. So thrilled to be joining you here tonight. We've got Joe Cronin from IUS TV Sports and Big Ten Plus joining us. We've got Emily Fox behind the scenes producing things and making all of the magic happen. We're looking forward to talking IU football for the next 30 minutes. We're going to be doing this all throughout the season. We hope that you will join us. Most of the time we'll be online. Sometimes we might be in person. So there'll be some opportunities to check out what we're doing there. But Joe, first of all, great to have you aboard. Thanks for joining on this interesting odyssey that we're doing here as we try to bring more IU football talk to the masses.
Yeah, it was really exciting to break ground on this. I appreciate you choosing me to be a part of this. And football's back. It's exciting.
Back. It's back.
It was exciting. It was exciting last week 0, when Florida State lost in Dublin. It was exciting here in Bloomington. There's been a more buzz for IU football in a preseason than really any of my time on campus, especially with first-year head coach Curt Cignetti taking charge of this team. And just there's an energy. There was an energy at the tailgate fields, and it's an exciting time for football fans across the country. And then I think with IU fans especially, there is something to be excited about with this 2024 season.
I've been watching IU football for significantly longer than Joe's been alive. So he's here to bring the optimism. I'm here to temper it with occasional cynicism, but also my own optimism, because I agree with you, Joe. There is a palpable buzz around IU football that we just haven't seen in the past few years. It was a little bit like this coming into the 2021 season. That did not turn out particularly well. And unfortunately, the 2 years after that didn't turn out well either, which is why we find ourselves here at the dawn of a new coaching era for IU football with Curt Cignetti at the helm. What we're going to do on the show tonight, we're going to start off by talking about that FIU game. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the things that was absolutely exciting and revealing about the team in a good way, the things that they need to work on, a lot of things to talk through. And we've obviously got some feelings that we need to talk through with the IU fan base as well. And this is where we're kind of landing on things, as Justin just pointed out. IU fans have been duped for ages in the eyes of a lot of folks as far as football is concerned. And the thing is, I don't totally disagree, not so much in terms of like being purposely duped, but there's been a lot of false starts with IU football and fans getting excited. And we'll talk about that some in future episodes. The thing of it is, I do think that there's a lot of reason for optimism with Curt Cignetti and this staff and what they're doing with IU football. We're looking forward to talking about it throughout the course of this season. Before we get to that, just a reminder, folks, that the podcast, as with all of the podcasts on the Back Home Network, brought to you by Home Field Apparel, your place to go for the finest in college fashions, the softest fabrics, the coolest designs, like this one. And we look forward to having you go to homefieldapparel.com, check out their amazing array of college gear. They just launched some coaching windbreakers. I don't know, Joe, if you saw one of those. I think that would be right down your alley from an apparel perspective. But it's tons of T-shirts, long-sleeve T-shirts, hoodies. We're getting into hoodie season, unfortunately. But a lot to try out. You can use the code HOME23, get 15% off your first order. Again, homefieldapparel.com. All right, let's dive right into the game, Joe. So you were at the game. You were able to take in what you saw from your media credential. I guess maybe before we get into the statistics, what were the big things that stuck out to you from that game? What did you take away from it the most?
Yeah, before I jump into the game, you're upset about hoodie season? I mean, that means football is football. It feels great outside. One
of the things that people learn about me is, and I will admit, I am abnormal about this. I am the outlier. I don't really like autumn. I really don't like it when the temperature gets cold. I don't like it when the leaves fall off the trees. Being in Indiana, it's kind of like, it's tantamount to saying I hate tenderloins or I've never played a hand of euchre in my life. That's kind of how I feel about autumn. It just doesn't vibe with me the way that spring or summer do. And so, yes, I have a ton of hoodies, but I don't really enjoy hoodie season per se.
Okay, well, I guess agree to disagree in that regard. But regarding Week 1, season opener against FIU, something that stood out to me at the start is I was roaming around, stopped by your tailgate for a brief moment. there was a buzz. A lot of conversations you'd hear walking by was about football. It wasn't about like what they're doing in 3 hours. It was, hey, when we go in the game, where's our seat going to be? Stuff like that. Conversations that I guess last season, even this year before, that weren't talked about much because this team didn't have much to talk about. As a 2-10 season, 3-9, 4-8, just not a lot of quality performances. And obviously, it's so early into the year, only being 1-0, a 31-7 beatdown of a Conference USA team isn't a ton to hang your hat on, but still, it's just working out some of those early season kinks. And then the energy at the start of the game, when IU's getting ready to walk out of the tunnel. First off, I was paying attention to Coach Cignetti. He was so locked in as compared to back with Tom Allen. He's firing up his guys, tapping them on their helmets, doing the little side-to-side sway. Zick just standing there, looks at one of the Big Ten Network guys, is like, "Can I get a countdown for when I actually have to run?" That's what he said.
Yeah. And
then just all serious, all business is out there. But the buzz around the stadium, above it, student section, it was loud, especially at that start. And I think that was something that really stood out, was what was that first game atmosphere, especially at the beginning, going to look like?
I found, and my friends who I was texting with throughout the game found Cignetti watching to be almost as entertaining as the game itself. And in a couple of cases more so. Like, it was like, wow, he really, it was interesting. And Scott brought this up on Crimson Cast over the weekend. It's like, normally, Tom Allen would be jumping in everybody's huddle, would be, in every meeting, would be running up and down. Cignetti not only was very stoic on the sidelines, but also kind of stood away from everybody during play, was 20 yards away from where the bulk of people were, might stick his head in quickly on offense to say something, but really kind of let everybody to their own devices. And he was clearly very locked in. I mean, everybody's seen the video of him with his jaw locked after that penalty, and it's just like, wow, great, our coach is a nut job in the right way. This is exactly what people are looking for. But I also thought it was interesting just because it was clear from his body language, from his reactions, that he wanted execution from Indiana, and he got it in some cases, and it was like, all right, that's what we should be doing. And there were other cases where they didn't give that, and it was clearly not something that he was excited about seeing. And that is a real change of pace. I mean, you covered the team last year a little bit. You saw what the situation was like. It just felt different all the way around, but it was really interesting to kind of get a chance to see him on the sidelines for the first time in a live action situation.
Yeah, it was interesting to start to take it in, seeing like a play is happening down on the 40 and he's on the opposite 30, just pacing the other way. And I think part of it has to do with the fact that Mike Shanahan calls the offensive plays and Bryant Haynes controls the defense. But also just he's a football guy, and he just is so locked in, and he kind of had to take in the moment. Obviously, he has won everywhere he's been, whether it's been at IU, Pennsylvania, Elon, or even James Madison. It's a new feeling. He's at a power 4 level now, considering the Pac-12 is no longer. But I think there was probably a little bit of nerves. He might not admit it, considering the personality he is, but I think there were nerves, especially for week 1.
I know. I think you're right, and I think that's a good. You would expect that. I mean, and the guy's been waiting his whole life to have this type of a head coaching opportunity. So certainly, I think there's some of that, and I think that there's clearly a lot of confidence and swagger with Curt Cignetti. It comes through, but there's also, I think, in any situation where you've got a head coach coaching a new team, especially with the roster build that he had, where it's like, here's a bunch of guys from my old school, here's a bunch of guys from the ACC, here's some guys from the Big 12, here's the guys that came back from last year. For all of that, it's got to be a little bit nerve-wracking because you really don't know how they're going to react in a live environment until they're out there. But they actually reacted very well. Let's go ahead and get to looking at some of the statistics from that game. And, we're going to start right off with the team box score here. And, I'm going to zoom in a little bit so we can get a little bit of a better view. Still some nascent technology here. There we go. So you can see Indiana really dominating on offense. And that's as much a story of the offense as it is the defense. As much as the offense kind of got a little bit criticized afterwards for not being more clinical, for not having more points on the board, they outgained FIU 414 to 182. They significantly outgained them on the ground. And just from an offensive perspective, you got to be happy at least that your rushing attack is that effective. This was actually the highest total average yards per carry for IU in a game against an FBS opponent since Michigan State in 2022. It had been a while since they had really had this level of effectiveness on the ground.
Yeah, and especially the fact that it came with a 1-2 punch of the running backs. It was Tyson Lawton getting the bulk of the carries. He had 16 and punched in 2 touchdowns as well as Justice Ellison, transfer from Wake Forest, had 10 carries for 68 yards. And we were able to talk to Lawton after the game, and all the credit he gave was to the offensive line. Said they were given holes. They were given holes even when Rourke was pulling it, and that's in regards to an RPO when he's finding a different read on a short route. But the offensive line played well. Two members of the line, it was Carter Smith and Bray Lynch. They were in the top 10 of highest graded run blockers this past week. So it was the only school that had 2 in the top 10. So the offensive line played their tail off, especially on the ground. I mean, 6 yards per carry, it doesn't matter who you play. That is going to be an effective job by that offensive line. And whether it was Ellison or Lawton, they weren't getting touched until 4 or 5 yards into their run, and they were good contact running backs, so they're able to fall forward, maybe break one, so they're able to make some good plays on the ground.
Brian Toohey, disputing your calls that the Pac-12 is dead. I'm actually going to side with Joe on this, Brian. It was a great story the other day. Actually, the Pac-12 cannot come to an agreement with the Mountain West about scheduling. Like, you're in trouble as a conference if you can't get the Mountain West to partner with you on something. But no, your point is well taken. The running game looked good. Defensively, this team really showed out. And I think, to me, the big story, as we scroll down to some of the defensive statistics, is how effective IU was. They really played about as well as you could expect. And to me, it was fascinating how effective the defense looked coming off of the Tom Allen years, where Allen, obviously defensive coach, coaching defense at Penn State right now. It's like that's a coach you would have expected the defense to always be the best part. But that was sneakily kind of the undoing of the Allen era, was the defense not playing up to its level of expectation. Meanwhile, you got to feel pretty good about Aiden Fisher, D'Angelo Pons, Jalen Walker, like this whole group of players coming in from outside and making this type of a contribution immediately. That really gives you a lot of confidence in the types of personnel that Cignetti was able to bring in.
It just seemed like there were hungry guys at all 3 levels of the defense, whether it was guys in the front like Mikal Kamara or James Carpenter, both those guys coming from JMU. And like you said, Aiden Fisher, he had a hell of a game. I mean, 2 tackles for loss, got himself in the backfield again with a sack, flew around the field, led the team in tackles. And then D'Angelo Pons, Josh Sanguinetti, guys in the secondary, Sanguinetti returning back from IU from last year. They had a good game, and Amari Farrell getting his first interception in an IU uniform as well. It's just there were guys playing at, once again, all 3 levels, and I think they were fired up. And Bryant Haynes has a pretty good system of physical outside guys. They swarm tackled too. There were not many broken tackles, and it was something that Cignetti was asked yesterday about the tackling week 1 when you don't tackle all throughout fall, and he said he was pleased with the way his team tackled, considering they had not had a lot of practice doing so.
Curt Cignetti had some good things to say specifically about his defense in the post-game press conference. Let's go ahead and hear those comments now.
We like to pride ourselves on being real fast and physical and disruptive up front and creating a lot of different looks for the defense and being really good against the run. I think we gave up 53 yards rushing, less than 200 total yards. And we've always been really good against the run and had TFLs and sacks. So it was nice to see that carry over with this group.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the big things. It's not just that they've had good past success with defense, but to come in and play that well. And granted, it's FIU. It's not a very good team that they were playing against, but we saw teams play against other teams the caliber of FIU and not have as good a defensive performance. And really, I mean, outside of that one drive at the end of the half where FIU scored, it was almost a flawless defensive performance. They even picked up an interception later on in the game. There were a lot of things. I think the thing that I took the most out of it, Joe, was just how many of the top contributors were not on the roster last year. I mean, Isaiah Jones deserves some credit. He didn't get a lot of play last year, but he was on the roster, and he made 6 tackles in this game. Josh Sanguinetti had 5 tackles and a half a tackle for loss. And pretty much everybody else in those top contributors came from either JMU or transferred in from somewhere else in college football. It's an interesting thing. And there's some names we didn't see on the stat sheet that were on the roster last year that we kind of expected to. But it's clear that they brought in enough personnel that they can have a good defensive game. And I'm sorry, holding anybody in FBS under 200 yards in a game, I don't care who it is, that's a pretty good performance. I guess maybe Iowa would be the one exception. But everybody else, it's like, this is a good performance that you hold these teams to that low of a number of yards.
It's a good thing Indiana doesn't play Iowa this year. You don't want to be eating those words. Not that you would be, but I think with the defense and with some of those 26 new players made their Indiana debut on Saturday, which I think that goes into just the weight of the transfer portal in this modern era of college sports and how Indiana, Curt Cignetti, they utilized those assets very well and brought in guys like Aiden Fisher, the two running backs who rushed for a combined 142 yards on the day. It was Ellison and Tyson Lawton. Yeah. And just guys like that were making plays all day. They found a new home here in Indiana. And it goes to show that people were hungry along with this 63-year-old head coach who claims he's too young to stop learning.
Always a good thing to hear from folks in charge, I think. That's got to be a process. Yeah, you mentioned Tyson Lawton, one of the players that had a good game statistically for IU. It's one of those things. We can see a clip of him in the game, and this was the touchdown carry that he had, or one of the touchdowns carries that he had. And two things here, I guess. First of all, we can certainly talk about how well the offensive line was run blocking and how well they played overall. But I think the other thing to keep in mind is that Indiana, with their top three rushing backs in this game, Elijah Green, Lawton, and Justice Ellison, none of them were on the roster last year. They were all on ACC rosters, except for Lawton, who was on JMU's roster. But it's interesting to see that group come in and immediately become the folks that are getting the ball regularly. And for Indiana, it's funny, Indiana wanted to be a running team last year, almost to a point of ridiculousness. They're doing option runs with quarterbacks and just stuff that they weren't well suited for. We didn't really know what Indiana wanted to do on offense this year, and yet they come out and have one of their best rushing performances of the last several years. That is really intriguing, and I'm really fascinated to see where that goes as we move forward, because that could be an identity. I mean, they clearly have three backs and a good offensive line, and that's sometimes all you need in these sorts of situations.
And I agree. I think they have the versatility in that running back room that can compete with those Big Ten teams once the schedule comes along. Now, obviously, there will be the juggernauts they play when they head out to Columbus in Week 11 to take on Ohio State, but that's so far away that we can't really make any sort of prediction of that. But I will add about Week 1, when you see teams, a lot of the times they try and get run heavy just because the timing of things are a lot harder when it comes to passing the ball. And you saw it a few times. There were a few miscues in that second half once the offense stalled out a little bit, where Rourke was missing a few. It just seemed like timing routes were a little bit off, just half second, half step, something like that. And he even admitted it when we talked to him, just he went back, felt like overall the performance was solid for a first game, but it's like you just get back into the lab and work for that next week. And I think with this upcoming game on Friday will be a good kind of just get some of those timing down, considering it's an FCS opponent.
Yeah, it was one of those things where you could look at the passing game and say not sufficient. Curtis Rourke, kind of the jury's still out, 15 to 24, 180 yards, a touchdown. But there were a lot of drops. I mean, there were a lot of balls that Rourke put right on the money that the receivers just dropped, and there were holding penalties. There were other penalties that ended up negating good opportunities offensively. And again, I think that will be something that gets addressed and can be fixed as we move forward. I felt like I was more worried that the defense wasn't going to be ready and the offense would be. I'm fine with the offense growing over the next couple of weeks into itself if the defense is already in a good space. We did have a question from John. Any additional word on Donovan McCulley's injury and possible availability? I think Cignetti addressed that a little bit in the press conference that happened today, Joe, or yesterday. What's the word on McCulley at this point?
I'm trying to pull up the transcript right now. He addressed it a bit. I mean, he was a little equivocal.
I mean, it was one of those things where it was interesting that McCulley didn't get targeted more than he did in the game.
Yeah.
But he did get targeted. Actually, I just texted a friend of mine, like, has McCulley gotten targeted yet? And then, of course, they threw him the ball literally the next time. But then he went out immediately, got hit in the head. I think he had a stinger of some sort, but doesn't appear like it's necessarily going to keep him out of action.
Yeah, it seems like it's a day-to-day thing. He said he was liking his progress heading into this first week, playing fast, doing a nice job. And right now, day-to-day, not entirely sure if he'll play on Friday, just considering the level of opponent that it is. But right now, all that is just a day-to-day update for Don McCulley.
Yeah, so I would remain optimistic that we'll see McCulley maybe in somewhat limited action against Western Illinois, because that's probably not going to be that much of a challenge from a matchup perspective for him, and maybe give him some extra time to get well. But I think he's going to be fine moving forward. We did a couple of funny comments. Matt Kubat saying, what dimension did I just fall into that you just use the words good offensive line? Look, I mean, here's the thing. You could see a little bit of the beginnings of it last year, and I think Bob Bostad knows what he's doing with the offensive line. But I think what was missing last year was there wasn't a complementary offensive scheme that allowed for the offensive line to avoid having to sit so long that it made mistakes. I mean, a lot of those plays that we saw last year with Walt Bell and even after Walt Bell got fired, they were slow developing, or they were asking the offensive line to do things that they were not really well suited to do. What I saw in this game was handoffs were pretty quick. The passing game, when there wasn't something happening, for the most part, Rourke knew at least to get rid of the ball or target somebody short. I really liked the way that they utilized Zach Horton early on, that touchdown pass that he caught. That play, that's what I've been waiting for the last couple of years. It's like, hey, can we please use the tight ends? Can we please use somebody other than the wide receivers to catch the ball every single time? Because that will open things up. And so, yeah, I mean, it's hard to be a good run blocking offensive line these days. Now, granted, again, FIU probably not the best offensive line exemplar to look at moving forward, but it's a good start. And to some degree, it's like we saw Indiana play a lot lesser competition last year trying to run the ball, and they averaged about 2 yards a carry less than they were able to manage in this game. So a lot of good things to think about and project forward on with this particular team, I would say.
I'll add something brief to that offensive line. I mean, like you said, with Bostad coming in, it was a night and day shift about just the quality of it. And then back to last season with that offensive, the first few games, they were rotating two quarterbacks with Taven Jackson and Brendan Sorsby. They had no idea what they were doing offensively. Like, respectfully, they didn't. And now they have a sixth-year quarterback who has won Player of the Year in his conference before. I was back in 2022 in the MAC at Ohio. It's just a well-experienced guy that even just the brilliance in the basics, like where to hand the ball off, timings of his steps, he's going to have that more down to the science, that there aren't going to be these miscues in the running back, these experienced running backs like Justice Ellison, Tyson Lawton. They're able to find the hole quickly. And I think it comes down to they have a consistent guy at quarterback, and it seems like for the first time since what was supposed to be Michael Penix.
As we move out of talking about the game, we mentioned earlier Aiden Fisher leading the team in tackles, but he was also asked about something that came up in the post-game press conference with Curt Cignetti, and it's something that's been talked about on social media a little bit, which is the attendance at the game. Now, the attendance itself was about what you would get for this type of a game, about, I think, 44,000. But a lot of people left at halftime. If you've been to an IU game, you know that. But Fisher had some comments about that we'll go ahead and play now.
Just knowing that the games aren't going to get lopsided anymore. And if they do, we're going to be on top. So the biggest thing I'd say is stay in these stands, and we need the fans to get us going and keep us in these games, and they play a bigger role than they think.
I mean, it's interesting saying, well, games aren't going to be lopsided. If they are, we'll be on top. That's a great message to send to fans. It's like, well, look, we're going to be there leading, or the game's going to be close. And either way, we want you in the stands. This is something that Curt Cignetti kind of brought up unsolicited in the press conference after the game, where he's like, we want to start some new traditions here. One of them is getting people to not leave at halftime. And it's an interesting thing. And I'm curious from a student perspective, you obviously were covering the game, so you didn't leave. At least I don't think, did you leave at halftime, Joe?
I was there the whole time.
Okay, good. I just wanted to make sure. But a lot of people did leave. Now, the game it slowed down a bit at that point. Indiana was up relatively comfortably. I mean, they were only up 14, but it was a bit jarring to just watch everybody leave and not come back. And there's been a fight over what exactly we should be thinking about all of these items. But Joe, I mean, from the student perspective, I know people are excited about football, but there's just this culture that's hard to break with the students about, hey, you get to halftime, you're going to go out and go back into the tailgate fields or go somewhere else.
Right. And it's something that just so ingrained into what IU football has been these past couple of years. It's like, yeah, you enjoy your tailgate, go to the game for what was a quarter at times, and then go back home and take your nap or do whatever. And I think with this year, with some of those shifts, it's hard to expect something. He has been in town, but like the season just got started and the results just got started. And 31-7, that's a good scoreline. That's a week 1 victory. But I think
Joe having a little bit of internet issue here, but no, to kind of pick up on your comments, Joe. Yeah, it's one of those things that we tried to talk about this a little bit on our show on Crimson Cast earlier. This idea, we'll get Joe back in a second, but it's this general idea of what comes first: people in the stands supporting the team throughout the whole time, or people who are not in the stands. We're going to remove Joe from the screen for just a second while we get his video feed back to where it's supposed to be. Getting people in the stands first and then the team wins, or the team wins and then you get them into the stands. And one of the things that I have been saying for a while on this front is it's not going to happen overnight. And you're not really going to be able to shame people into sitting in the stands the whole time. They have to really want to be there. And this is one of those things that I think gets frustrating to IU football fans, like hardcore football fans, because most hardcore IU football fans don't need convincing. Like, they are there for the whole game and they want to stay there for the whole game. But almost any football situation, whether that's, some of the places like Michigan and things like that, they may legitimately have 100,000 people who stay there the whole time. But most of the time, you've got a certain collection of casual fans and you've got a certain collection of hardcore fans. And it's getting the casual fans to stick around that's always the biggest challenge. Looks like we got Joe back. He's back.
Sorry about that. Internet just went down.
Hey, these things happen. It's fine. We're still live. All is good. But no, as I was saying, you have to convince the casual fans that this is worth their time and staying there for 3 hours. And I think it's just going to take a while, because you've been here for a couple of years as a student, Joe. There's not that level of culture around football specifically. For students, they'd rather go to basketball games because there is a basketball culture, even if the team hasn't been as successful as historic. But that's what football is going to have to do. You're probably not going to get people to stick around for the second half of the first game. But hey, you go out, you beat Western Illinois, you have a good showing against UCLA, you beat Charlotte. Now all of a sudden it's like, hey, this team's 3-1 or 4-0. We feel like we're cooking. We've got something that we want to stick around for. That's really where the attendance is going to come from ultimately.
And especially, I think taking a grain of salt with those first couple games, just because of the opponent they're playing, it's like once they start seeing the Nebraskas come in, Washington, that's a new Big Ten opponent, that'll be fun. Michigan, that's the reigning national champion. When they come to Bloomington, that should theoretically be a game that Indiana has a winning record at, considering their non-conference slate and some of their early Big Ten games as well. So I think there just is some excitement down the road, and it's just going to take time. And I think towards the end of the season, that should be the goal. Come the Oak and Bucket game, the goal should be that Memorial Stadium is packed for 4 quarters.
Yeah, it's going to be a really fascinating evolution to watch, and we're looking forward to watching it. IU plays Western Illinois this week on Friday, unusual day and time for a game, 7 o'clock kick. Western Illinois is real bad. We didn't spend a whole lot of time previewing them this time around. I'm hoping Indiana wins that one handily. Otherwise, we're going to really look foolish when we come back Tuesday of next week and say, God, we completely underestimated Western Illinois. I have faith in IU. I'm looking forward to seeing what they do to fix things up. Joe, any final thoughts before we wrap up this first episode?
Not really. It looks like the Hoosiers will go 2-0 heading into their first road trip of the year and first game against UCLA ever.
Well, and I'll note, as David Littleswope noted earlier, UCLA didn't look great. A win there would be significant. They almost lost to Hawaii. Watched most of that game after I came home from the IU game. We will see what happens with IU and UCLA this upcoming week, and we'll talk about that in depth next week, next Tuesday, 6:30 p.m., same bat channel. Be sure to tune in. Our huge thanks to all you folks who watched and commented throughout the course of this episode. We really appreciate it. Hopefully it was worthwhile for you as well. If you are catching this on the replay or you're catching this in audio form, set your calendars, 6:30 Eastern on Tuesday. We're going to be doing Tuesday Night Bison Chat for the entire season. We hope that you'll join us live. We'd love to hear from you. Huge thanks to Emily Fox, who produced behind the scenes, and we're looking forward to working with her the whole season. Joe, my thanks to you as well. Great to have you on board, and we'll look forward to doing this again next week.
Pleasure to be on.
All right. Thanks for Joe and for Emily and for the entire Back Home Network and IU Sports Media. I'm Galen Clavio saying thanks for joining us, folks. We'll catch you on the flip side. Bring back the Bison. So long, everybody.